Let's talk sliders. In my last video there was a scene where we cut to a Lightwave scene with the Beats headphones, and I was using sliders and nulls to control the depth of field, the aperture and the aperture edge, and someone asked me to make a video on it, so let's make a video. This is the scene that people were talking about in the other video. Let's take a quick look what we've got in here. We've got Octane Renderer's thin lens camera. The aperture and aperture edge are two scalar nodes, and they're driving aperture and aperture edge respectively. We've got a distance node, and driving the distance node is the camera focal point, which was the other null that we created, and the camera null. They're both info nulls. So you just click on the info null, select the item you want, and then drive that into the distance, and then that will give you the distance between the null and the camera. And then if we select that and click redraw, that shifts the focal point to wherever the null is. And for the sliders, we've got those, and if we move those, slide them about, we have control over the aperture and the aperture edge. And that's the basic scene. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to strip the scene down and clear out all the sliders and all the nulls and the nodes, and I'll show you how we set it up from scratch. Back in a minute. Okay, so we're back in Lightwave, and I've stripped the scene down to its bare minimum. So we've got the object, we've got the camera, we've got the Octane render target with a thin lens camera. At the moment, if we open up IPR, we've got an aperture of 1, aperture edge of 0.03, and our focus I have picked using pick focus from IPR. Okay, and that's pretty nice. But what if we want to control that with sliders and nulls? Well, the first thing we're going to need to do then is we're going to need to add two new nulls. We're going to add one called camera focal point, and we're going to add another one called sliders. Just going to open up that and give them different colours so that they are easily identifiable later on. I'm going to go back into the Octane render target, and I'm going to add in two scalar nodes. I'm going to rename those to aperture and aperture edge, and I'm going to drive those into aperture. Try that again. Drive that into aperture and aperture edge, and so now we can control those values by ramping them up in there. Okay, and if we want to pick a different focal point, we can do it through there. What if we wish to use a null to drive the focal point instead of having to click on the IPR camera every single time? Well, what we can do is we can set up a distance node, and the minute we drive that into focal depth, it will disappear. We need the distance for the camera, so we're going to use the info node, item info node. We're going to click on R, we're going to call that camera. Double click on the node, and we're going to click on camera, and we're going to need also another info node, and this time that info node is going to be the camera focal point. And I'm going to rename that to camera focal point. And then we're going to take the world position of the camera focal point and the world position of the camera. So if we take the camera focal point and we move that now to another position and click on redraw, our focal point is now the distance from the camera focal point, i.e. the null, to the camera. Now, for some reason, and I don't know if this is a bug or what, you have to click on redraw or update, it depends. It's the only one that doesn't seem to update the IPR window. The aperture and the aperture edge does, enveloping them does, anything moving in the graph editor does. For some reason that just doesn't update, and you have to manually update it using redraw or click on update in the Octane Render Target window. Selecting that nulls can be a bit of a ball ache when you've got a lot on screen. So what I tend to do is click on P for properties, add item shape. We'll double click on that, make it something a bit more visible, and because the scene's quite small, we'll scale it down to something that's a bit more better to view. And now we can just move that about and then redraw, and that's our focal point updating. So how do we add the sliders then for the aperture and aperture edge that you saw in the previous part of the video? So what we do is we select the sliders null, click on properties, go to sliders, double click, and not available. Right, that's because we didn't envelope our scalar node nor our aperture edge. If you don't set those to be enveloped, they're not selectable in the sliders object. So let's try that again. So back to sliders, and this time you see from the Octane Render Target both aperture and aperture edge scalar values are available, so just double click on them. I'm going to set a minimum maximum range for the aperture 0 to 10, and for the aperture edge I'm going to set it from 0 to 0.2, and there we go. It's updated that for us. Click on anything, another object, and then click back on anywhere on the actual sliders window if you wish, and then clicking and holding on the nav button will allow you to move it out of the way, and it will constantly stay at that part of the window. And you can do that on any of the windows if you want. So it's there on that one, move up to that one, and so on, and it'll just stick there for the duration of your animation or your work. So now if we open up IPR, and then if we move the sliders, you'll see it instantly updates instead of having to refresh when using the camera focal point null. And by using those methods, we can create some nice depth of field effects. Now the other bonus of doing it this way is because everything is enveloped, well, the aperture and aperture edge are enveloped, that means you can keyframe and animate the focal point, the aperture edge, and so you can have some nice sort of animated DOF effects. Rotating object, which is sort of out of shot, camera comes in and you can focus on any part of the object. So there you go. that was sliders and nulls, and using them to specifically in this video drive aperture, aperture edge and focal point. Big thanks to Lino Grandi, because most of these tidbits I've picked up from his videos across the years. And once again, any comments on YouTube I'll answer, or any comments on Facebook, and we'll see you again soon. Cheers, bye bye.